The current political climate has led to a dramatic surge in that most American of pastimes, running for office. But 2018 will be an election unlike any before in the United States, with hundreds of physicians and researchers running for national and statewide offices. Joining me today is one of those physicians, Dr. Nadia Hashimi. Dr. Hashimi is a pediatrician, a mother of 4, the author of 3 best-selling novels, the child of Afghan immigrants, and the wife to a refugee husband who is now a neurosurgeon. She is running for Congress in Maryland's 6th District. Dr. Hashimi, thank you for joining me on Doc to Doc.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Now, it's hard for me to start with any question, being a physician talking to a physician, aside from healthcare. So this is something that kind of unifies and divides the country at the same time. We're pretty unified in saying that there's something wrong with our healthcare system. We're very divided on how to fix it. So what's your take on the central problem with American healthcare?
I think the central problem with our healthcare system is that there's far too much money going into it and not enough results or meaningful results coming out of it. And so on either side of the aisle, all of us are in agreement that the soaring costs of healthcare need to be addressed in a meaningful way. And that's where I've found that we've been able to align people from different backgrounds and different ideologies. We do know that we all need healthcare. It's just a matter of fact that whether you're a doctor or if you're a teacher or a lawyer, everybody at the end of the day needs healthcare. And so there's got to be a way to access that system and for us to deliver that healthcare in an affordable manner.
So what are the strategies that you would propose in Congress to rein in the costs of healthcare in the U.S.?
So I'm proposing a host of strategies, but really it comes down to taking out the overreach of the middleman, which is really where I feel like the insurance companies and pharmaceutical companies and even medical device companies really have set their own prices and really have far too much control of the market. So when I look at mergers like Aetna and CVS and some of the other mergers that are happening, I'm worried that we're developing trusts and we are not going to have any way of reining in those egregious prices that we're seeing.
Pharmaceutical companies are the source of much ire, as you say, even on both sides of the aisle, particularly with regards to drug pricing. Nevertheless, the government, at least in the form of Medicare, has been unwilling to negotiate drug prices with pharmaceutical companies. Would you advocate we change that?
Absolutely. I think that that's where we can actually start to bring the prices back down to where they need to be. I think one of the arguments against negotiation of pharmaceutical prices has been that the pharmaceutical companies need that revenue to support their research and development. But we can actually force the pharmaceutical companies to focus their R&D energies and those resources in meaningful ways by rewarding them for providing real innovative medications and doing the kinds of work that demonstrate a new kind of medication that actually cures diseases or changes outcomes for patients, rather than changing formulations or delivery mechanisms in a way that merely extends a patent on a pharmaceutical product.
Now, a lot of Democratic candidates running in 2018 and some even in 2020 have endorsed the idea of a single-payer system in the United States. And we'll put aside the political headwinds against such a plan. Where do you come down on single-payer?
For me, this is not something that I approach with a partisan mind. This is really an issue of how are we going to continue to afford health care. And for right now, I see the commercial insurance companies as middlemen in the system. And so my plan for approaching this issue is to roll out a Medicare as a public option, providing Medicare for all children, and bringing down the eligibility age to 55. And that really helps us expand the Medicare infrastructure. Medicare, for most practitioners, realize that it's a very efficient system. Administrative costs are very low compared to other insurance companies. And for patients, it's very easy to use as well. So by expanding that Medicare system, I believe that we can provide more fluid and meaningful healthcare for a lot of people. And then that will be a natural stepping stone to expanding that to a system that provides coverage for everyone.
So physicians really are in this unique situation politically when it comes to this. They do really span all political stripes. And part of that, I think, is because as physicians, we see patients from every socioeconomic class, all ethnicities, all races. We interact with these people much more, I think, than other professions might have opportunity to do. Nevertheless, physicians, many physicians at least, are essentially small business people. They are running an office, they have employees, and they get very concerned when the specter of they worry that cost control will hit them, those practitioners who, are not giant pharmaceutical companies, but really individual people or small groups of people who are just, trying to build a life for themselves. What do you say to those physicians that get, appropriately, I think, nervous when there's talk about reining in healthcare costs?
I can understand that completely. In addition to being a pediatrician and having worked in an emergency room at a children's hospital, I've also managed a surgical practice. And so I completely understand the demands are on running a small business because that's what I've done. This has been our small business. But what I've seen on our end is the amount of resources we have to put in order to fulfill the requirements of billing, to deal with the insurance companies, to be able to turn around that revenue. The administrative costs are a huge burden on a small business, and I know that firsthand. So by streamlining the process and pushing more towards systems that will decrease the amount of administrative load and really allow physicians and practitioners more time in their day to actually sit face-to-face with patients and to deliver the care that they want to, that's where we're going to have some real powerful change. We also have to make sure that these small businesses can stay alive. They're really the cornerstone and the founding people that kind of deliver the health care that a lot of individuals want. We don't necessarily need to see all of these small practices getting eaten up by larger conglomerates and medical systems that are taking over the landscape.
I want to turn briefly to immigration, which has become a central issue in politics these days. As I mentioned, you're the daughter of Afghan immigrants. Your husband is actually a refugee. I've heard some in the Democratic Party saying that candidates should stay away from discussing immigration this year, from putting up a fight about immigration. They think it's a sort of a losing issue with the Democratic base. What's your position on that as the daughter of immigrants?
I'll tell you that I'm not one to listen to the polls. My set of values and my opinions don't come based on what polling numbers tell me or from what the party line is. I will stand up for immigration protection, for expanding pathways to citizenship, and I'll stand up for the Dreamers, and I'll stand up against a travel ban that calls out chain migration, which is actually family reunification. That's the exact process that actually enabled my husband to come here as a teenager. Because it's the right thing to do, because I know the value that immigrants bring to this country. In our area, we have about a quarter of the physicians here are of immigrant background. And so for me, I look at immigration as a plus, as a boon to our country, something that enriches our communities and our professional workplaces as well.
You're running for office in Maryland's 6th District. The incumbent, John Delaney, a Democrat, has stated he's not running in 2018. He's planning apparently to run for president in 2020. And this is a thick race. I was looking at all the announced candidates. There's a number of people who've announced on both sides, including on the Democratic side, a state senator and a state representative. What are you doing to stand out in this crowded field?
So in this crowded field, healthcare is still the top priority. Now that's one poll that I am listening to. Maryland has done a poll, the Democratic Party has polled the district, and healthcare is the top priority. Now that doesn't change anything about where I stand or what I believe in, but it does make it all the more important for me to be vocal, to be out there, and to let people know that I'm bringing my experience from the front lines and my solutions from what I've seen to the table, because we can fix this system, we can drive down costs, and we can do so in a meaningful way. But we've got to have the right people in office to do that.
You have a couple of candidates in the race who are millionaires, multimillionaires, who are putting a lot of their own money into the race. What's your opinion on money in politics, and how are you doing in terms of fundraising and competing with this?
You know, from the moment that I decided that I wanted to run, the first thing that people told me were, you're going to have to raise about $100,000 from your friends and family in the first month. You're going to have to spend about 40 hours a week on the phone dialing for dollars, because that's the way campaigns are run. Now, I've stood up and made a video in support of public financing for Montgomery County elections, and I've already signed my term limits pledge. And I do this because I feel like the more time you spend in office, the more time you have to develop these kind of strange alliances. And that's what we see that happens a lot in political landscapes of all different levels, whether it's federal or down to the state level. So I'm here not wanting to really turn to people and ask them for money for most of my time. I'm really here wanting to develop solutions and to bring some real ideas and to get some work done. So I would be in favor of campaign finance reform and taking a look at how we can provide some public financing for all different kinds of elections as well. We need the diversity at the table, and we won't have that if we have people required to come in with deep pockets.
One of the other active issues of the day that physicians may have a role in addressing is the issue of gun violence. We've obviously had a number of mass shooting tragedies, but in fact, I was just speaking with a gun violence expert who points out that on a day-to-day basis in the United States, more than 100 people die due to firearms. Is this a public health issue? Is it something that you as a physician in Congress will want to address?
Absolutely. Now, I look at the school shootings with the mind of a pediatrician, with the mind of a mom. My children are doing lockdown drills. My 6-year-old daughter is talking about shelter in place. As a pediatrician, I'm also looking at it with the lens of, how are we talking about mental health? Are we scapegoating mental health completely in the gun violence conversation? I'm also looking at it as a wife who watches her husband run out the door when there's a trauma. He covers a trauma center. And so sometimes the cases that we hear about on the news are the cases that he's running off to take care of. So gun violence is something that we talk about a lot in our home. I do see it as a public health crisis, and I think it's something that we need to really pay attention to. And I'm so glad that the teenagers are forcing the conversation, that they're marching and demanding that we march in step with them. And I think that we're going to see a lot of changes because those teenagers are just about voting age, and they're going to demand some real change and answers.
So I want to close with an observation that I'll turn into a question. So I'm seeing a lot of doctors and scientists who are running for office, as I mentioned earlier. What is going on? You're in the thick of this. What is the zeitgeist that has led all these people from different walks of life, but scientists and researchers, to enter the political sphere, which has for a long time been the domain, of lawyers and sort of career politicians? Why the influx of scientists and researchers?
There's a saying that if you don't have a seat at the table, you're either at the seat at the table or you're on the menu. And I think that's what we've seen happen in this year, where science has really felt like it's under attack. People who want to stand up for women's rights, we're doing so because we have felt that that's been under attack. And that's a positive movement. There's a positive energy. Really, Congress is a House of Representatives, and that representation is supposed to be diverse. It's supposed to be diverse in all matters of demographics. And so whether it's educational background or racial background or ethnic background or whatever it might be, we need that diversity at the table, because we need someone, if we're going to be talking about healthcare or women's reproductive rights, we need someone who's actually engaged in delivering healthcare, not just people who have legislated healthcare.
Well, Dr. Hashimi, thank you very much for joining me. The primary, for those of you watching who are in Maryland's 6th District, is on June 26th. We'll have to touch base with you again as the campaign season moves forward.
Thanks so much.